It's 1970. You're on Woodward Avenue on a Saturday night. Beside you at the stoplight sits a plain brown Buick Skylark. No stripes, no hood scoops, bench seat, poverty hubcaps. The guy driving it looks like he's on his way to a PTA meeting. You're in a Chevelle SS 454. You have no concerns. Then the light goes green, and he's gone. What just happened wasn't an accident. It wasn't a fluke. It was the result of a calculated decision by a team of Buick engineers who buried one of the most brutal torque figures in American automotive history inside a car that looked completely harmless, because General Motors' corporate rules left them no other choice. This is the Buick Stage 1. And the reason most people have never heard the full story is because GM's internal politics made sure they wouldn't. Let's start with a number. The 1970 Buick Stage 1 option produced 510 pound-feet of torque, not 490, not 500, 510. That number, documented in Buick's own technical specifications, exceeded the Chevrolet LS6's official torque rating of 500 pound-feet, the most feared engine in General Motors' lineup. And yet Buick never mentioned that number publicly, not in a single advertisement, not on a window sticker, not in a dealer brochure. Why? Because officially Buick wasn't in the muscle car business, and GM had rules. Here is the internal structure that shaped every performance decision in Detroit during this era. General Motors in 1970 operated as a collection of competing divisions, each with its own assigned identity. Chevrolet owned youth performance, Pontiac owned the street fight, Oldsmobile owned brute displacement, Buick owned executive luxury, Cadillac owned prestige. These were not marketing suggestions, they were enforced corporate policy. When Chevrolet launched the LS6 Chevelle with 450 horsepower and the most aggressive muscle car package ever offered by a major manufacturer, that was Chevrolet's territory to own. No other GM division was permitted to challenge it directly, especially not Buick, the brand your parents bought when they were done pretending to be young. Buick's engineers understood exactly what the rules were, and they found the narrowest possible gap to slip through. The Stage 1 was not given a dramatic name. It was not marketed at drag strips or through performance-focused magazines. It did not get its own model designation. It was an option code, a box the dealer could tick on the GS 455 order form. The option modified the standard 455 cubic inch engine in ways that, taken individually, each sounded reasonable. A revised camshaft profile with more duration and lift, improved cylinder heads with larger valves and better flow characteristics, a specific open element air cleaner, a recalibrated Rochester quadrajet carburetor, and a performance-tuned intake manifold. The Stage 1 package also included a specific rear axle ratio and suspension tuning developed to put the power down without drama. Total cost to add this option at the dealer counter, roughly $100. What that $100 actually bought you was documented in third-party testing that Buick had absolutely no intention of funding or publicizing. When Car and Driver tested a 1970 Buick Skylark GS Stage 1, they ran the quarter mile in 13.38 seconds at 105.5 miles per hour. To understand what that means, consider the context. The LS6 Chevelle, with its factory race pedigree, its 454 cubic inches, its massive marketing investment, and its public identity as the fastest street-legal car General Motors had ever produced, turned 13.76 second quarter miles in comparable period testing. The Buick was running 13.38 in a car that looked like it belonged in a church parking lot. But the real story isn't the strip time. The real story is what was printed on the window sticker. The official horsepower rating for the Stage 1 in 1970 was 360 horsepower, not 400, not 430, 360. That was the number Buick published. That was the number that appeared in official GM documentation. And that number determined what insurance companies charged you every month. This wasn't accidental. Every major American manufacturer was underrating high-performance engines during this period, and the reasons were layered. First, liability. If you rated an engine at its true output, you owned every lawsuit that followed when someone wrapped the car around a telephone pole at triple-digit speeds. Second, insurance suppression. Higher horsepower ratings triggered higher premiums, which raised the effective cost of ownership and discouraged buyers. By 1970, insurance companies were already beginning to surcharge vehicles with published ratings above 400 horsepower. A car rated at 360 horsepower flew under that radar. A car rated at its actual output would have been hit with premiums that priced it out of the market it was targeting. Third, and this is the layer that applied specifically to Buick, brand politics. You cannot publicly claim to be building the fastest engine in GM if your corporate mandate is to build luxury cars for adults. Independent engineers and automotive journalists who dynoed Stage 1 cars during this era consistently placed actual output between 400 and 430 horsepower. Some estimates ran higher. The gap between what Buick published and what the engine actually produced was not a rounding error. It was a deliberate buffer zone that kept the car out of performance conversations while it was quietly winning them on the street. And here is the particular cruelty of GM's corporate structure. The engineers at Buick who built the Stage 1 almost certainly knew exactly what they had. They had the dyno data. They ran the strip tests internally. They understood that they had produced a drivetrain that could beat the LS6 in a straight line on public documentation. And they could not say a single word about it in any customer-facing material without crossing a line that could end careers. So they filed the technical specifications where Buick engineers file things. In the service manual, in the option order form, in the quiet communication between salesmen who understood what they were selling. Here's the detail that really tells the story. Buick didn't just build a high-torque engine and drop it in a standard chassis. They engineered the entire Stage 1 package as a system. The suspension geometry was retuned specifically for hard acceleration launches. The turbo-hydromatic 350 transmission was calibrated for performance shifts rather than comfort. The rear axle ratio was chosen to put the engine in its power band off the line. Every component in the Stage 1 drivetrain was designed to work together to extract maximum performance. And then, the entire system was dressed in conservative trim, sold through the normal Buick dealership network, and never mentioned in any advertisement larger than a footnote. What Buick had also done, and what distinguished the Stage 1 from many of its more famous competitors, was build a car that was genuinely usable every single day. The 455's massive displacement meant peak torque arrived low in the RPM range, and stayed there across a wide band. This was not a high-strung screamer that needed to be above 5,000 revolutions per minute to come alive. This was the kind of engine that pulls from 2,000 revolutions per minute with authority, the kind where the car feels like it's moving the road rather than working to keep up with it. Many of the high-horsepower competitors that looked faster on paper required specific conditions, specific weather, specific launch technique to access their power. The Stage 1 worked everywhere, every time, whether the driver knew what they were doing or not. Buick dealers who understood what the Stage 1 package actually meant treated it accordingly. There's documented testimony from salespeople of the era describing a quiet ritual. A particular customer walks in, clearly knows cars, asks about the GS 455. The salesman asks a few questions, decides this person understands, mentions the Stage 1 option quietly. Not as a sales pitch, as a courtesy. The people who knew asked for it. The people who didn't never heard about it. Meanwhile, Chevrolet was running super stock drag events and national advertising campaigns about the LS6. The narrative of 1970 muscle car performance was being written in public, loudly, with massive marketing budgets. Buick's fastest car was selling on word of mouth among the people who happened to be paying close enough attention. In 1971, GM mandated reduced compression ratios across all divisions in response to the approaching unleaded fuel transition and tightening federal emission standards. The Stage 1 lost compression. The window of time when Buick had a legitimate case for the most torque in the GM lineup was approximately 18 months. After 1971, the entire muscle car market began the contraction that would effectively end it by 1974. Insurance surcharges, fuel crises, and federal safety regulations did in 2 years what competitors couldn't do in a decade. In that 18-month window, Buick built approximately 10,045 Stage 1 cars for 1970, fewer than 8,000 for 1971. These were not exotic hand-built limited edition machines. They came off the same assembly line in Flint, Michigan as every other Skylark. A $100 option code on an order form was the entire difference between 13.3 second quarter-mile performance and an ordinary family car. The LS6 Chevelle earned its reputation. The marketing was massive because the machine deserved it. But in a documented third-party drag test on public record, a brown Buick Skylark with a bench seat and no hood scoops ran nearly 0.4 of a second faster through the quarter mile. And the reason most people in 1970 never knew, that had nothing to do with the engineering. It had everything to do with which division was allowed to say it out loud. Consider what a different outcome might have looked like. If Buick had been allowed to compete openly, if the engineers could have published the actual horsepower figure, run factory-backed drag events, placed the Stage 1 in the same advertising conversation as the LS6, the muscle car history books get rewritten. The Skylark GS Stage 1 becomes a household name. Buick competes for the performance buyer directly. The 10,045 cars built in 1970 become 50,000. Instead, the Stage 1 sold quietly to the people who already knew, disappeared in 1972 as compression ratios fell, and spent decades as a footnote known mainly to serious collectors who happened to understand what 510 pound-feet actually meant. The data was always there. The torque spec was in Buick's own technical literature. The quarter-mile times were published by independent journalists. The dyno estimates were in print. Nothing was hidden. What was suppressed was the context, the connecting of specific facts into a coherent argument that a car sold as a luxury family vehicle was running strip times that embarrassed the factory's own performance flagship. Corporate brand hierarchy did what it always does when a division steps outside its assigned lane. It looked the other way, kept the advertising quiet, and let the car quietly win the races nobody was officially supposed to know it was entering. If you still have doubts about what the Stage 1 was capable of, find a period quarter-mile test and read the ET. The stopwatch has never cared about brand hierarchy.